Okay, so this is my first live ever, and I'm not gonna lie, I feel nervous. I've never done this, and it definitely feels weird talking to people by myself, but I see Andrea. Hi! Hey! Yay, I'm so glad you joined, because I'm over here having a mild panic attack over doing this, so thank you. I'm just overjoyed to see you joined. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about teaching like life skills and teaching kids, yoga and mindfulness, and what I think, thank you, what I think those will be is, yay, Margot's here too. Hi, I got Andrea, I got Margot. I'm feeling better now. I got my mug with some water in it to, warn everyone that they better be careful. They'll be in my podcast. So, okay. So yeah, I just figured, I'd hop on and, I've been teaching kids yoga and mindfulness since, 2012. And I so often get emails, because I used to travel and teach a lot. And then things changed during the pandemic. But that's right. My ADD is going to get distracted with the messages, but keep them coming. So I keep getting, questions from people like, hey, how do you adapt to online? And, hey, we're going back to school. What should I consider? Or I want to start a kids yoga and mindfulness series with a health center. What should I do? And so I figured I would just share some of my thoughts on some of the common questions that I receive. I did receive a handful of questions, and what amused me is most of them had to do with behavior, which I love to talk about, but is also really hard when we can't have a back and forth conversation. And yeah, and then I think that's it, unless any of you all have any questions or any things that you want to talk about. And then at the end of this, I will definitely reach out to both Andrea and Margot and be like, hey, what was this like? Because again, I feel nervous. Okay. So one of my favorite questions that I get a lot, and then I also just got when I told people that I was hopping on live to do this, is what do you do when kids get silly? And I love this question because kids get silly all the time, right? And sometimes when we come in to teach life skills, or we come in and teach social emotional learning or mindfulness or yoga, the expectation is kids should be calm, kids should be quiet. And then the moment they put their hands on their belly, they start giggling and they can get silly. And so the first thing that I want to say is think about when you were a kid and why you got silly. And for me, that's one of the first things I think about is when I was in elementary school, when I was in middle school, when I was in high school, there's having fun with friends, and then there's also being silly. And my silliness definitely occurred when people were asking me to do weird things that made me feel uncomfortable. And so when you ask kids to do things, right, they don't have the emotional awareness of oh, this feels weird, this feels uncomfortable, I'm going to try to get out of this discomfort by being silly. And so I just think that the first thing is to really think about what is this behavior communicating? When a child is being silly, when they are doing things to try to disrupt from the class or distract from the class, what do you think's underneath it? And my first instinct is that it is something they are uncomfortable. But the other thing that I want to say when talking about, things like silliness or really all behavior, is that all behavior is communicating unmet needs. And I say that a lot. I try to remind myself of that a lot, not even with kids, with grown-ups too. And when I would think about all behaviors communicating unmet needs, I would think about how it was like a more superficial thing. Like, sometimes if I'm grumpy, or sometimes if I'm hungry, I might be more grumpy, right? And so my grumpy behavior, or my like anger or whatever, might be communicating an unmet need that I'm hungry. But now, when I think about how all behavior is communicating unmet needs, I think about the book by Dr. Bruce Perry, and he now just made it with Oprah. He made a book with Oprah. I recommend anything by Dr. Bruce Perry. He wrote a book called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, and it talks all about how trauma shapes our life, but how we're also resilient. But in his most recent book, What Happened to You? I'm quickly scanning to remember the title. He talks about this story of how this boy was going to school, and he started in a new classroom with a male teacher, and there was all of this like chaos. And this kid had been like, doing really well in all of his grades before then. And then it was like fourth grade, and he started just having major explosions in class. And Dr. Perry was working with him. And then one day the father, who was like an absent father or a neglectful father, like showed up. And Dr. Perry just naturally like noticed that this guy was wearing Old Spice deodorant. Okay. I think if anyone knows Old Spice deodorant, you know how that smells, right? It might take you to a positive or a negative experience. And it clicked for Dr. Perry that is also the scent that the classroom teacher wore. And so the kid was getting set off all the time because he had an unhealthy relationship with his father. And every time he went to class, so the scent is very strong. Every time he went to class, he was reminded of his relationship with his father. And that was very painful. So when I'm talking about all behavior is communicating unmet needs, I used to think about it in the superficial. Like, oh, this kid is hungry. Oh, this kid is, tired. But a lot of times those unmet needs might be things like we have no idea about. Like the unmet need is like he needs his father's love, right? And that trigger came from something like the smell of deodorant. Okay, so that is my long-winded way of saying that when kids are silly in class, kids are communicating something to you. And as the teacher, you can either react by shutting it down, stop doing what you're doing and listen to me, and then they're not going to learn the life skills anyway. Or you can reflect, hey, I notice that there's some silliness going on right now. I noticed that when we put our hands on our belly to breathe, people started getting silly and moving their bodies or making noises. And be curious about that, because you never know what you can learn when you're actually more curious about the behavior and you reflect to the kids what you see in a very neutral and like curious way. Not like, I noticed that there's silliness in the room, right? That totally changes them. Like, oh, I noticed when we put our hands on our belly, some of us started making noises or fidgeting or laughing. Like, I'm curious when I have that experience. For me, it tells me that there might be something uncomfortable, but I'm curious what your experience is. Okay. Welcome everyone else that has joined right now. I was just answering one of the questions about what do you do when a kid gets silly? And so if you work with kids in any capacity, but I'm really focusing on working with kids and teaching them life skills, like how to pay attention, how to calm down, how to regulate their emotions, how to fall asleep at night or stay asleep at night. Maybe not stay asleep, but fall asleep if they wake up in the middle of the night. That one's a tricky one for me. You're welcome. Oh yeah. So I teach these kids all of this, and see, now I'm on live and I'm like, I'm panicking. It's okay. And so if you have any questions about how to teach kids any of these techniques, or you have, thank you for the hearts. You have any questions about any behaviors and working with children with a variety of behaviors. At the beginning of this, I was saying how a lot of the questions at camp had to do with behavior, like how do you navigate silliness. Another question that I got was, have you ever had students say that yoga and mindfulness is dumb, or that they already know it all? And I really loved this question because it made me think of like lots of students, but one particular student who in middle school, on her like first day of 7th grade coming into the yoga class, she looked at me and she was like, I already know everything there is to know about yoga, so I'm just gonna sit out. And for me, I was like, challenge accepted. And so for me, I made every part of the class, look not like that typical yoga class. Like any typical yoga class. And for me, part of teaching yoga and mindfulness and life skills and social emotional learning is teaching about how to connect with each other, right? How to be in community with each other and be okay with that, and how can we be fun and how can we have fun and be silly with each other? And so what I often do in the beginning of classes in anywhere that I teach is I bring a lot of improv games in. And they're like the warm-ups that you do where we're all in it together and there's no winners and losers. But it's about like attuning to the group. And there's also it's just connecting right now. This also connects to what Dr. Bruce Perry says about creating like rhythm in group. Because sometimes when we've experienced some trauma, we lose the connection of rhythm to ourselves. And so when we can be in like a rhythm with a group and attunement to the group, that can help us or help our students regulate or us regulate. As the grown-ups, we should be regulated. So when this girl came in and I was like, oh, that's awesome. You already know everything. Like I, started learning yoga in 2006 and I'm still learning. And she was like, oh, okay. And then I was like, you're welcome to sit on the side, but if you ever want to join us, you can totally join us too. And then I went and I brought all the kids, and some of the kids I knew from the previous year, all of the kids in a circle, and we played a game called Zip, Zap, Zop. And all it is you take your hands together and you look at someone in the circle and you go and you take your hands like this and you say zip, and then the next person says zap, and the next person says zop. There's really no right or wrong way to do this, and if you make a mistake, no big deal. And we laugh and we play again. And that girl ended up joining, and then she was like, this is yoga? And I was like, yeah, this is a form of us connecting with each other. This is being okay with each other. And she was like, oh, maybe I don't know what yoga is. And so with this question, have you ever had students say, yoga mindfulness is dumb, or they already know it all? I've had that a lot, especially like yoga is dumb, yoga is boring, mindfulness is stupid, When that stuff comes up, the other thing that I like to do is, be curious. It's always about being curious, right? If we are teaching our kids mindfulness, which is ultimately about being curious to their experience, we have to model that. Right? Like we have to be the ones that are modeling it, because kids learn so much more from how we are than what we do. And so if kids say like yoga is dumb or mindfulness is dumb or whatever, I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, what have you learned? Where is this coming from? I'm not going to try to tell them like, hey, yoga can actually be really good for you and make your body feel good and make your mind feel good. It's like, I want to be curious about why they have these feelings towards it. And then the other thing that I really want to do is I want to make it relevant for each of my groups of kids. So I remember in New York City, I would teach at this one school where it was like chair yoga. It was a bunch of 9th graders, and they were not interested in yoga or mindfulness at all. And they just wanted to be on their cell phones. And coming in as the, outside provider. I can't be like, hey, you all, I don't even know your names yet, but turn your phones off and put them away, right? Like, they're going to hate me. So how do I make it relevant? So I was like, oh, I notice a lot of you are on your phone. Have you ever heard of tech neck? And I was telling them how when we're always like this, it changes how our body is. And so can we practice being on our phones, holding them up straight and noticing how it feels, to have different posture with holding our phones. With them, I talked a lot about like stress and using like a lot of how we can use our phone to notice like when we feel stress or not. We send a text and we don't get a response, and how does that feel inside? And then with this one particular group too that they weren't really interested in it, I found out a lot about sports. And they loved basketball. And so like I've said this before, I don't care about basketball at all. Sorry. But I learned at that time so much about the basketball players that were practicing yoga and mindfulness, and why they were practicing it. I learned about LeBron James and Kevin Love and Steph Curry. And there's even like videos of them. And so I would be able to use the kids' whiteboard and I would show the athletes talking about it and practicing it. And then like, one of the people was doing like a high lunge. I think it was like Kevin Love. I was like, hey, do you all want to just try a high lunge and notice how it feels? So the other part is when, kids are saying, this is dumb, be curious about why they think that and then make it relevant to them. Find out what's interesting to them. Like if technology is interesting them, then find a way to Steve Kerr. I don't know who Steve Kerr is. Find a way. I'm a little outdated in my basketball. Find a way to find what they're interested in and align what you're teaching with what they're interested in. Make it relevant to them. Because if they don't know what's in it for them, then they don't care to learn it. Some classes I've had when they say that, they think that it's boring, I do more talking. Like we can all talk as a group together and get to know each other more and have more meaningful conversations. It's not just like talking about after school stuff, which is fine too. But I will give them, oh yeah, I knew that. Steve Kerr, coach of the Golden State Warriors. Maybe that sounds kind of right. Yeah. Anyone can correct us if Margot and I don't know what we're talking about, but that sounds legit. But yeah, it's just, finding what is meaningful to them. So like having conversations about things like, when's the time I made a mistake and how did I handle making that mistake? So it's about getting to know your people, getting to know your class, getting to know your students, and then making it relevant to that group. And then the last thing I'll say is just really knowing what your intention is when you're going in to teach. Because if your intention is just for kids to learn a bunch of practices and yoga poses, that might not match what they want. But if what your kids are, if your intention is to teach them life skills or to be able to access a sense of inner peace or calm within them, it's going to be easier to be more adaptable with your lesson plans when you know what your intention is. And my guess is that all of our intentions aren't that our kids have a beautiful tree pose, but that our kids have the understanding that they have all the tools inside of them. Yeah, so my most recent "this is dumb" came from a student who is so self-conscious. That's it, right? It's like there's always a reason that kids are saying these statements, right? Again, all behavior is communicating unmet needs. And I was saying earlier, and you might have already heard this, but in middle school, if someone tried to teach me yoga, I would have been a terrible student. I would have gone out of my way to get myself out of that class because being around my peers, doing things in my body, being quiet and breathing would have felt so weird that I would have said this was dumb, or I would have started giggling, or I would have like poked a friend or whatever to break that discomfort. And you know nothing about basketball. All right. I'm catching up to all the comments. So if you all have any questions, definitely throw them out there. I have like one more question on this list. I had a teen 2 weeks ago. If your job was even real. And I mean, so my response would be, when I was your age, I didn't know it was real either. Because, you know, when I was in high school, I had no idea that I could become like a life skills and a mindfulness and a social emotional teacher. But that, yeah, I mean, I feel like many of us that are yoga and mindfulness teachers, like, it is a fantasy job. It's an amazing job. Like, you know, it's so rewarding and fun that, yeah, that's, yeah, it's a dream job. Yeah. So we get to make an impact on people in a positive way that hopefully they carry the rest of their lives and have fun doing it. And also, like, we get to practice what we love too. So, okay. My final question that I got, I did kind of blend the behavior ones together because I did get a bunch of them. It was like, what do you do if a kid's disruptive? Or what do you do if a kid doesn't participate? And I would just say that it's pretty much the same with everything. The first thing is like, did I set clear expectations for the class? Right? Because sometimes kids aren't participating because they don't know what the expectation is. Maybe they think it's fine to just check out. So did I set any clear expectations? Same thing if like kids are running around the space. Did I set clear expectations that when you come in, you sit down? Because if I haven't set clear expectations, then kids are always just meeting their expectations based on what they think it is. The other thing with behavior, so, you know, did I set clear expectations? That's number one. Number two is, and this is not in any order, this is helping me stay focused. What is my intention, right? Like, if my intention is for kids to look good doing yoga poses, which, again, I hope that is not your intention. But if that is your intention, then having kids participate is going to look different than if your intention is for kids to understand that they have resources within their own body, or for kids to understand that they can make choices based on what feels right for them. You know, if your intention is to teach life skills and part of those life skills is listening to yourself, then a kid not participating isn't that big a deal. So when a kid's not participating, did you set clear expectations? What is your intention? And then be curious about it. Like, go check in with the kid. Hey, you know, and I wouldn't do it in the middle of the class. But before or after a class, I'd just be like, hey, I noticed that, you know, when we're doing this, whatever it is, breathing or playing improv or whatever, you're just laying down by yourself. And I just want to check in with how things are doing. And the more we can be curious with our students, the more we can get from them, and then ask them guiding questions to help them find out like what's going to be right for them. And then, yeah, the final question that I got was, how do you know what to charge? I get that question all the time. What do you charge for teaching kids yoga? What do you charge for schools? What do you charge in studios? What kind of split do you do? Is it different for health and wellness centers? Is it, you know, and the most simple way to answer this is it's different wherever you are. And so, you know, if you're living in New York City, it's definitely going to be different than if you're living in upstate New York. So what I did when I first started out was I looked up what all the dance studios were charging for kids. I looked at like the local karate dojos. I looked at the art classes. I looked at different kids' classes and what they were charging and what people were paying for their kids. And so I was able to take that and apply it to what I was offering in New York City. Same thing with like teaching online. Pay attention to what other people are doing. The only thing that I'll say with charging is that it has to feel right for you. But you also have to remember that a lot of people are making their living this way. And so if you just do everything for free, it's causing a lot of harm to the people that are making a living doing this, because they won't be able to do it, and they're also being people of service. And so that's the only thing I'll say with charging is, I think a lot of times when we start out, we want to charge less. We feel like we're not ready. We feel like there's other people in the field, we got that imposter syndrome. Why should I charge what this other person has been doing for 10 years? And that's fine and fair, but what you're offering is valuable. It is. You're offering life skills for kids that they're not usually getting in school, sometimes not in life. Even just modeling healthy relationships, showing when a grown-up cares about a kid, right, is making an impact on that child's life. And so what you are doing is valuable, and you need to be compensated. And we live in a capitalistic society, so it has to be with money. Maybe you can barter at the beginning, but just know that you're a representative for the community when you are teaching these classes, and we're all in this together. So that one, talking about money is a little weird and uncomfortable, but what I've found is just figure out what everyone else is charging for kids in that area. And then, you can always say, everyone's welcome. This is my rate, and, I'm not going to turn anyone away. Okay, so this was weird and also fun. Fun because I love talking about this, but weird because I just see myself on a screen, so it's like I'm teaching myself. If you all have any questions, you are welcome to. And if you don't, I'm going to sign off and, breathe and text Margot and say, how'd that go? And then, and then think about another one. So I am not seeing any questions, which is totally good. So I'm going to hopefully end this correctly. I think I hit the X. And thank you all for joining. And if this was helpful at all, please let me know so I don't feel like a weirdo talking to a screen. Thanks. All right. Bye.